And welcome, my friends. Welcome to another Jewish Forum program. And have I got a guest for you? He is somebody very, very special. His name is Jim Messina, and Jim is a teacher in New Haven. And his topic is going to be a teacher's journey through history. A teacher's journey through history. Jim went with a group of teachers this past summer, and they traveled through Germany, Poland, and Israel. His story is one of excitement, human interest, exploration, learning, and reflection. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Herman. I'm doing very well.
Good. I'm so glad you're going to be on the show, and I know you have a lot to share with us. So why don't we start? Let me ask you a little bit, tell my viewing audience about your background, where you teach, your education, and anything of special interest.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Herman. I grew up in West Haven, Connecticut, and I went to Notre Dame High School and went on to Central Connecticut State University, where I pursued a degree in education. And after I graduated from college, I was invited to teach at St. Martin de Porres Academy, which is where I teach in New Haven. We are a tuition-free Catholic school for students in and around the city of New Haven who wouldn't be able to afford a privileged education like the one that we offer at our school. And so I've been teaching there since 2005. We are in our 6th year as a school. We've had 2 graduating classes.
That's wonderful.
And the reason I'm here today is because I teach the Holocaust in my religion classes at St. Martin de Porres Academy. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, St. Martin, I believe, was the first black saint.
Absolutely.
Am I right?
St. Martin de Porres is the patron saint of social justice.
He was born in Peru, I believe.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Absolutely. Good memory.
I love history and all kinds of ethnic history. Now, you were with a group that visited the 3 countries that I mentioned. What was the name of your travel group?
The name of my group was the Holocaust and Jewish Resistance Teachers Education Program. It's quite a mouthful, but it is a wonderful program that I was very privileged to be a part of. And I applied for this fellowship last year, and I was invited to go on this trip. We met in Washington, D.C., and 25 teachers and 2 incredibly wonderful leaders led us through this trip, and we went to these 3 countries.
And these teachers were from all over the country?
Absolutely. One of my very good friends that I made on the trip, his name is Sid Schroyer, and he is an English teacher in South Bend, Indiana. Wow. My roommate was Brad, and he came from Ohio. There were teachers from the South, from the West, all over the United States.
May we see the group picture, please?
Absolutely. So the picture that you're about to see,
group picture, please,
is our group, and this group traveled together for 21 days, and we spent a great deal of time together. The picture that you're going to see is one that was taken at the Rappaport Memorial to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and so that group is there. I'm sort of in the center. I'm wearing a yellow shirt. You can maybe pick me out of the group.
Oh yeah, I can see it, right.
And this group of people traveled under the direction of Stephen Feinberg at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and Elaine Culbertson, who is a superintendent in Philadelphia.
Very interesting. How did you get involved with the topic of the Holocaust, with the group? You must have special interests in the subject and so on. You want to tell our viewing audience?
Absolutely. Growing up, I always had an interest in history and things that have happened in the past, and I grew up in a Roman Catholic household and knew of certain historical events that involved not only just my religion, but other faith traditions as well. And once I came to teach at St. Martin de Porres Academy, as a Roman Catholic, they asked me to teach religion classes, and I wanted my students to know about our history, and I wanted them to know about Passover and the importance of our rich religious heritage. heritage. And so Dr. Lauren Kempton, who is the director of the Holocaust Education...
Who was on my show, by the way, a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, I know. Dr. Kempton is the head of the Holocaust Education and Prejudice Reduction Program, HEPRP, and she, once we met, she insisted that I get very much involved in Holocaust education, and she invited me to be a part of the programs at the JCC in Woodbridge and travel to Washington, D.C., and then said to me, I have the next trip for you, and she recommended this trip for me, which was a life-changing experience.
Oh, I bet. Speaking of the trip, I think you mentioned you first went to Israel, is that right?
That's correct.
Very quickly, we only have 30 minutes. You want to tell us a few interesting adventures or impressions when you went to Israel?
Israel is an incredibly beautiful country. Growing up, you always hear about the Holy Land and this place that has so much tradition and so much culture and value.
For so many religions.
And for so many religions. That's a point that I try to impress on my students, that it's a holy land for Jews, Muslims, and Christians.
Absolutely.
And so being there, it was an incredible experience. Being able to walk on the Via Dolorosa as a Catholic was a moving experience, but being there and seeing how these traditions and these faiths intermingled in Israel was an incredible experience.
I bet it was.
And as a Holocaust educator, having spent time at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., to then go to Yad Vashem, which is, as they call, the mothership of Holocaust education.
Right.
It was an incredible experience. And so for me, as a teacher, to meet people like Dr. Yehuda Bauer, who is a Holocaust scholar beyond any other, Holocaust scholar, and to be able to go with a group of teachers whose insights and teaching experiences influenced, the way our trip went, it was an incredible experience for me.
I bet you'll never forget your experiences in Israel.
I will never forget it.
Yeah.
When growing up, I remember seeing pictures of Pope John Paul putting his note into the Western Wall. And for me to be able to go there and to pray for an extended period of time, thinking
I get the chills when you think about that.
Thinking of my students and my family and my friends and all the people whose support I had when I was in Israel, it was an incredible experience that I recommend for anyone.
How many days did you spend in Israel?
We were there for 4 days. So we spent 4 days in Israel. We spent time at Yad Vashem, as I mentioned.
Yep.
And because we were focusing on Jewish resistance, we also spent time at Masada. We spent a day.
You went up to Masada.
We took the gondola. We didn't hike up to Masada, which it was about 120 degrees the day that we went up to Masada. So it was a wonderful, once-in-a-lifetime experience.
I've been there, and it's incredible.
Yes.
When you think about how the Jews held out against the Roman Empire.
Absolutely.
For all that time, and rather than become slaves, they committed suicide.
And interestingly enough, having been a part of this program, we then saw the parallels that existed during the Holocaust with heroes like Mordecai Analevich and others who resisted the Germans
Ghetto, right.
in the Warsaw Ghetto.
Incredible. Okay, let's move on to Germany. What were some of your impressions in Germany?
Germany was an incredibly beautiful country. I was so moved. I wasn't really sure what to expect, knowing that it is a country that had to rebuild after the war, and going in and seeing what a beautiful city Berlin was. It was incredible to go there and to see historic places. Growing up, again, seeing archive footage of President Kennedy giving speeches in Berlin.
When he said, "Ich bin a Berliner,"
absolutely.
In German, and they loved it.
Yes. So being there, and yet seeing how diverse it has become, seeing today and going to different places. We would go to Gelateria or other places after our day sessions and spend time walking around the city and seeing what a rich and vibrant culture it is. It was wonderful to see.
I remember reading recently that they have the fastest Jewish community in the world. There's now almost 200,000 Jews. And after the war, there was just a few thousand. The way the Jewish population has increased in all places like Germany, where, during the Nazi era, where over 6 million Jews were murdered.
Absolutely.
But I understand there's a very pro-Jewish, pro-Israeli feeling among the German people. Did you detect that?
It was good to see that in the places that we went, when we went to new memorials that were being built. In Berlin, there is a new museum that has just opened called Topography of Terror, where, although the title sounds a little, sounds very ominous, it is a way for German citizens today to see how things, went within the Third Reich. But to see new memorials being built, where you have this it's a controversial memorial. I was very moved by it. The memorial to the 6 million murdered Jews of Europe. And there are these enormous stone tablets that seem to rise out of the ground and undulate as if they are water. It was a very evocative memorial for me.
And they're building synagogues all over Germany, too, I understand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what we kept hearing over and over and over again was that under the Soviet era, when the Soviets came in and Berlin was divided, there was a time where people were not able to face the history of what happened, immediately after the war. But as you mentioned, once Germany began to explore their history and see how things changed over time, I think that it became a much more open and welcome society.
I'm glad to hear that, I did read also that many German Christian youngsters, teenagers, young adults, they will go to Israel during their vacations in the summer, and they want to work on a kibbutz. And, of course, they visit Israel, especially during the winter, down to Eilat and some of the resorts. So you get a lot of German tourists that are going to Israel.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and of course, tourists from all over the world. Very interesting. Then I believe the bulk of your trip was spent in Poland.
Absolutely.
You want to tell us some of your experiences, and would you name the camps, the killing centers, the concentration camps you went to?
Well, interestingly enough, if we can put the picture of Vladka up.
Yeah, picture of Vladka, please.
The picture of Vladka, I think, speaks to the reason for our trip.
Okay.
And so this beautiful woman who's still alive today, she's alive in New York City today. Vladka is the reason why our trip was made possible.
Is that right?
It was her dedication.
Oh, you got to tell us about it.
Yes. Well, Vladka is someone who was a part of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. She risked her life. She was an incredibly brave woman who risked her life to bring weapons and munitions and things into the ghetto. And because she looked very much like your average Polish citizen, she was able to move back and forth freely.
But she was Jewish.
She was Jewish, absolutely.
But everybody thought she was Polish.
Yes. Unfortunately, she was the only member of her family to survive. Her father died shortly before the war, and her mother and her siblings perished at Treblinka, which was one of the camps that we were able to visit. So, to get back to your question, while we were in Poland, we were able to go to the city. I have them written down here because we went to so many places over our time.
No problem.
We went and spent time in Warsaw. We went to Kazimierz Dolny, which was a very small shtetl, which is a small Jewish community. And from there we went to Majdanek, which is an incredibly moving camp because it's very much still intact. There are buildings that are still there. Some of you may have heard of the news reports that there was a fire at Majdanek over the summer. Weeks after we left, in a building where they have many shoes of the people who were held captive in the camp, there was an electrical fire in the bunker, and they lost a part of their history. And so if you go to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., the shoes that are there, which so many people feel an emotional response to, came from this camp in Majdanek. In addition to that, we were able to go to Lublin, a city called Zamość, which was a favorite of our group because we loved saying it so much. We went to the camp of Belzhic, which was one of the Aktion Reinhardt camps. We went to the city of Krakow. We went to Kielce, which had some events after the war, and we went to the city of Lodz, which is not too far from the camp Treblinka.
They had a ghetto there. in Lodz.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So some people may, when you hear the name Chaim Rumkowski, he was the head of the Judenrat, which was the organizational committee there. Right. And during our trip, we learned that from ghetto to ghetto, life was so much different. In Warsaw, for example, people could smuggle things in. There was sewage and drainage that was able to get waste out of the ghetto. However, in Lodz, it was much more away from the community, and there was not as much adequate sewage and other things that we would think of as being basic amenities. And so from ghetto to ghetto, oftentimes we think of them as all being the same experience, but they were very different from one another, which was interesting for us to see.
I understand, too, that in Warsaw, about a third of the population was Jewish before the war. And then, of course, with the ghetto, there was something like, 500,000 Jews. They brought more people in.
Absolutely.
In this crowded little area.
The insidious thing about the setup of the ghettos, Dr. Herman, was that they were specifically designed to be in the worst neighborhood of the city where they were built. And so these were buildings that were already dilapidated, and people were moved into this area and were forced to live. And the idea, unfortunately, that the Germans had was to confine, control, and weaken the people who were there by giving them very, very little food and basically waiting over time for decisions to be made that ultimately led to the final solution. However, one of the wonderful things about our trip is that we were constantly reminded of the kinds of resistance that people had. That basically living your daily life by continuing to pray, by putting your talit on in the morning and saying your prayers, you are actively resisting the Germans who were working basically to destroy an important part of European culture.
And also, I think it's significant that there were so many people, Christians, who risked their lives to save their Jewish friends and neighbors and bring them nuns and priests, hiding them in churches and convents. My guest last week talked about Pope Pius XII, and the topic was Pope Pius XII, saint or sinner? And he said that he was a saint, that indirectly he saved thousands of Jewish lives when he sent directives out to the bishops and the priests, in an underhanded way.
Absolutely.
To save Jewish lives.
Absolutely. In Yad Vashem, as you know, there is an avenue called the Avenue of the Just, where they have planted trees for the righteous. Thousands of trees.
The righteous Gentiles.
Yes, so absolutely. So non-Jews who risk their lives. And so when I teach my students about the Holocaust, oftentimes I teach them about Irena Sendler, who was a nurse who risked her life. I teach them about Jan Karski, who was a Polish man who hid within the camps and then came here to the United States to educate people about what was going on.
I read about him, yes. And didn't you say earlier we were talking, there's a monument to him?
Yes.
In Poland now?
Yes. In the town where he did most of his work, there is a memorial now there where he's actually sitting on a bench, so you can sit next to Jan Karski, who is an incredible man who did incredible things and saved many people's lives. And I teach my students about Sujihara, who was a Japanese diplomat who signed visas so that Jews could get out of the country, and many people who risked their very lives to save the lives of others.
And look at Wallenberg in Budapest.
Yes.
They say he saved over 100,000 Jewish lives by putting them in safe houses, giving them Swedish passports, identity papers.
Yes, absolutely.
So many people risk their lives. The other interesting thing, too, I just want to share, 6 million innocent men, women, and children, Jewish men, women, and children, were wiped out, were murdered by the Nazis. And also 5 million non-Jews, gypsies, Poles, Russians, you name it. And
there were many Christians. If there were Christians who actively spoke out against the church, they were confined. Many of them were imprisoned. And we have saints who came out. Maximilian Kolbe, for example.
Father Kolbe, so he's a saint now.
I have 2 of my students right now who are at Kolbe Cathedral High School in Bridgeport. And which is named after him. And
I knew the principal, by the way, Father Whistle. And when I went to Poland, I brought a group there, Sacred Heart. I brought him back artifacts, pictures and medals about Father Kolbe.
An incredible man.
He really, when you think about it.
Absolutely.
Let's go on a little bit. How could civilized people like the Germans, and many of them were educated people, how could they promote the Holocaust and do the killing? You have any thoughts about that?
This is a very challenging question. And when I teach it to my students, we talk about nationalism and how nationalism can have a wonderful effect and a corrupting effect on a group of people. And how people have the intention of creating a strong society and being proud of the country where they come from, and how that message can be changed and corrupted by people who have the intent to hurt and punish other people. And I think that the average German citizen wanted very badly to have food on their table, a job that would pay them well, and they wanted to be able to be a strong society like they had with their rich heritage. And unfortunately, they were led by a person who used his own maniacal beliefs in the form of Adolf Hitler, absolutely. And the people that he surrounded, his inner circle, were all using this idea of ideology to ingrain in average German citizens and get them to do things that they would not have ordinarily done. I'm convinced that the people in Germany are good people, and oftentimes I think they get demonized as a group.
Right.
But the reality is that I think people get swept up in the moment, and they think that what they're told from the pulpit, anti-Semitism, was something that was preached for far too long, unfortunately in some places is still preached. And I think that message, if you're told that from childhood, it is a message that you begin to believe.
You start to believe it, absolutely.
And that's why I believe that it is so important for us to inoculate our students. Not too long ago, I had the privilege of hearing from a survivor who knew Elie Wiesel, and when he was speaking to us, he said that the role of a teacher is to inoculate our students against hatred. And I think that is very, very important for us to remember.
Inoculate our students against hatred. I still teach at Sacred Heart University. I'm going to share that.
I hope you do.
Yep, I appreciate that. Another name that comes out of the Holocaust is Janusz Korczak. And maybe we see a picture of Korczak, and would you tell us the story about this great man?
Well, Dr. Korczak, it's wonderful to see a picture of him as I look to the monitor to see him. Dr. Korczak is a man who dedicated his life to children. He was an educator, he was a philosopher, he was a man who ran an orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto. Vladka Mead, in her book, Both Sides of the Wall, speaks about Dr. Korczak and the work that he was doing. He had dedicated his life to children so much that he risked his own life and ultimately perished because he wanted so badly to preserve the life of his children.
Now, he wrote books, children's books.
Yes.
I believe he had a radio show before the war, and he was loved by Jews and non-Jews.
Absolutely.
I think you said earlier they called him the Polish Dr. Seuss.
Very much so. That he was a published author who wrote a book called King Mat I that children in Poland, even up until a few years ago, would read in school because it was this idea of a children's utopia. And Dr. Korczak spent so much time with children that he decided to live within the ghetto and work at an orphanage for children. And although he had many opportunities to escape,
that's what I read.
He chose to stay with the children and to protect them because he did not want them to be corrupted by the evil of the adults that he saw in the surrounding community.
Sad to lose a great man like that.
Absolutely.
And then he went to his death. I saw a documentary, a film about him, marching off with his children to go on one of the trains.
Yes.
to their death, to their murder.
That was probably for me the most emotionally taxing part of our trip. We went all over Poland, as I mentioned, for 10 days, but the very last place that we went was to the camp of Treblinka, which is where Vlad Kamid's mother and siblings perished. And the story is told, many authors have written about this, there have been poems that have been written about Dr. Korczak, that as he escorted the children to the train, he sang with them because he did not want them to be afraid, that even though they saw SS guards on either side of their line as they were marching through the town, being made as an example, he refused to let those children be afraid and rode with them and died with them. And every time I tell the story, when we came back to the United States, there was a group of Cub Scouts, interestingly enough, or Boy Scouts at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and there was a scout leader whom I told the story, and a grown man burst into tears at the story because of what an incredible example he was. And so he has become a personal hero of mine. And so I keep the pictures that we have shown, the pictures of Dr. Korczak and Vladka, are now hanging in my classroom. My students ask if that's my mother and my grandfather, but I have to explain to them that they have a place of honor in my classroom.
Oh, that's wonderful. Jim, would you believe we only have 3 minutes left?
Okay.
It's just been a wonderful, wonderful program, talking to you sharing all these things. To my viewing audience, I'm interviewing Jim Messina, who's a teacher in New Haven at St. Martin de Porres School in New Haven, a Catholic school. And he went with a group of educators to Israel, Germany, and Poland, and he has been sharing his experiences. I have another question for you. How have you used your traveling experiences to enrich your teaching?
Well, I will answer your question by giving just a brief comment before I begin.
I know we only have like two minutes.
I know. I am indebted to Sidney Perry and the people at the Federation, the Jewish Federation of Greater New Haven, for helping me with my trip. And in honor of them, coming back now, I try very hard to instill in my students the ideas that I learned on this trip, how important it is to be a compassionate person, how important it is to stand up and not be afraid to do what is right when the time comes.
I like that.
That when we face a challenge, it is up to each and every one of us as an individual to stand up when others stand aside and allow things to happen. And so I have made it my purpose now in my classroom to make sure that the young men and women that I have the privilege of teaching know that message and will share that with their families and with their friends.
That is wonderful. That, to me, is a beautiful philosophy. And your students are very fortunate to have you as a teacher.
And I appreciate that very much, Dr. Herman.
I'm being sincere about it.
And if I may, the last thing that I would like to say for other teachers who may be watching this program, to tell you that oftentimes when we teach the Holocaust, our students may get overwhelmed and think to themselves, what is it that I can do? This is such a tragic story. There are very few bright spots in the history of the Holocaust, and I say that it is our responsibility to show our students that when they stand up and are vocal activists for places like Darfur, when they learn about Rwanda, when they learn about the conflict going on in the Congo,
that have been going on in the world.
I think that when our students know about them and vocally write letters to their legislators and to our president to encourage them to do something, I think that gives us an incredible role in our society.
Really? And again, they're so fortunate and lucky to have you as a teacher and to instill this feeling that you have. I always believe, too, that if teachers are enthusiastic about their teaching, it will rub off on the kids.
Let's hope.
We really hope. I think we have maybe 1 minute left. We don't? Okay, they gave me the signal. Yeah. Jim Messina, I want to thank you for coming on my show tonight, for sharing all these wonderful experiences that you encountered this summer. I'm also indebted to Lauren Kempton because she was the one that contacted you and gave your number to me for me to contact you afterwards. And it's just been a wonderful 30 minutes. And I want to thank you.
Shalom.
Shalom to you too, my friend. And I want to wish you continued success in teaching and in your personal and professional life.
Thank you very much,
God
Dr.
bless
Herman.
you. Thank you. And God bless you, my studio audience. It's been a